This is the first lecture we've had in quite a while, so we're really pleased that you guys could all make it. For those of you who don't know me, I'm pretty sure I know most of you. I'm Anna. I'm the Communications and Outreach Officer here, and I'm really pleased to introduce Rod. Rod is from the Nature Conservancy. He is from the Pacific Division. He's the Senior Marine Advisor, and he's been with us for a week now. He's been doing reef assessment surveys. And I've had the pleasure to get to know Rod quite well and get some time in the field with him. He's shared some really amazing stories. We've had some fun adventures, and I think he's going to have a really good presentation for us tonight. So with that, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Well, thank you very much, Anna. I don't think I can do a better job than that. And I think the introduction to me will come through what you're going to see, and I hope you still hold some respect for me at this talk, because I'm going to be unveiling pictures that have been under wraps for decades, and you'll see why later. But the other thing I want to say, Anna, before you disappear, that I am famous for making a short story long. So if you could just keep me on, going. And people have also, and so for those of you who come for deep science, I was told that this should be more entertaining than scientific. So I hope no one is disappointed at the end. Right, I'm going to take you on my life journey as somebody who grew up in Mozambique and embarked on a life of conservation, and how, so throughout it there will be stories of adventures and things, and the way we worked, or tried to work, and there will be also little snippets of how the approach to the science behind marine conservation and marine conservation evolved over the decades. So we start a long time ago, I'm almost embarrassed to say, back in the 1960s. Which one is me?
I see.
One on the right. One on the right. That's my friend Quappy. That's my friend Thug. And that's me. The one whose nickname has been eroded over time. And this is a hut on the peninsula in Mozambique. That whole area was an elephant reserve. And that's where I spent my university holidays. We made the hut of a wreck of an old fishing trawler. That's where the roof came from. And then whatever we found on the beach, bamboo, pallets and things. The first thing we made was the banquet table, but that's behind there. And we would go out every year, myself with whoever I could persuade to come with me. I'd take a 20-liter demijohn of wine, 10 gallons of water, a big bag of matches, little sachets of onion gravy powder, some rice, and a spear guns, and we would live off the sea. And I mean, there is a point to this, because, and it'll become a little clearer over time. As it says up there, the entry into marine conservation was very different than it is today. I spent a lot of time working with people, students, bright people, committed people, determined to have a career in marine conservation, and it's getting harder and harder to do. But it was easier then. I mean, seriously easier then. And the requirements really were tough feet, a good suntan, loads of energy. Oh, it did help too if you had some relevant training, but it almost wasn't like that was a criteria. And you just really wanted to have to do the stuff, and you had to be somewhat self-reliant and adventurous. And the other thing that made it so special is that there were no rules. And I think back, and I was telling Trina Lebra, if you don't know her, she's the director of our Pacific Division, my boss and many others. And we were talking about how on earth we could ever have the knowledge that we have today if we entered into the field with all the rules we have today. Good rules, they're all about our safety. But in the process of that, there are things you simply cannot do. I mean, I really had to work alone in the early days. We had fantastic freedom. There were challenges, there's no question about it. but it was really adventurous. And that adventure is what drove me into this field and kept me, hook, line, and sinker fixed into the field. So, now these are why I said that some things are coming out of brass. But that's my middle brother. I have two brothers. The youngest one's not there, and I'm the one with the barracuda, and the trevally and the grouper. So we fed ourselves off the sea. We literally went to live off the sea, and we knew and 5 kilometers away from us was a fishing village where we could trade fish for whatever we needed. And so we would go out and get the fish they wanted, put them on a stick, jog, and why we were so stubborn, I don't know, we'd jog barefoot, and burn the soles of our feet, and sort of hopping from one cluster of grass to another. And then we'd trade the fish, so they'd weigh the fish. We got no money at all, we got credit. So the first thing we did, of course, was drink all the cold beer. And then we would fill up our 10-gallon jerry can of water from the local well, and we'd buy coffee and flour and rice and garlic and onions and things. And then we'd stagger back with this heavy jerry can of water. And yeah, well, that's how we lived. And yeah, and it was a really sharky place in those days. And so occasionally we get a visitor like this guy, and you come in and we'd say, look, if you're going to spearfish, you'll see a whole lot of big fish. I mean, there was seriously a lot of big fish. And you never shoot a fish in this place unless you can shoot it stone dead, and this is how to do it. And this has a story behind it. He shot this fish, and it was a ribbon of sort of Pleistocene dune rock offshore, which was the reef. He was towards the inside, I was towards the outside, and the sharks were just coming at us. And I was diving down and chasing them away one by one, until a tiger shark came in from the shallows. I didn't see it. And I was vertically in the water and berating him to get that fish and put a knife in its brain and let's get on with it. And so I turned around vertical and I felt myself being lifted out of the water. And the tiger shark had come for the fish, and he'd seen it, and he pulled the fish away, and I was the next stop. And it was horrifying, but really that story is to tell you that we were in these remote places so far away from anywhere, and I don't know how we got away without serious injury. I was bitten on the leg once, I must say, by a barracuda. And luckily we had a needle and thread, so I was able to sew it up. And I learned a salient lesson: cotton, cells grow into cotton. So it might hurt like mad when you sew it up, but it hurts a lot more when you try to take it yeah, so it was very adventurous, and it just developed this love and passion of the seas. And we continued. So this is something that, is a photo to be embarrassed about, maybe. So this is a 440-pound grouper. That's a 220-pound grouper. And I'm forgetting to tell the story of marine conservation. I've got so much to tell stories. But yeah, so in these days, marine conservation awareness really was low. And the ideas, but communities were doing it in many places. Palau is one good example of it. So they were doing it here and other places, but it wasn't recognized. There was no sort of global recognition. If local communities were doing it, still it wasn't generally, and the timeline's flexible here because everything happens at different times in different places. But generally speaking, marine conservation awareness was still fairly low in the 60s, and certainly community conservation efforts were very little recognized. And it was also a hunting, shooting, fishing area, especially in Africa where I grew up. That's what people did. I wasn't too keen on hunting. I tried it once, it wasn't my thing. I mean, above water hunting. And we did this for a lot of reasons, and we were testing ourselves, I must say, and of course we were showing off. There's no, there's no question about it. But all this time later, I feel I put an awful lot of work into repaying my debt to the seas. I've had a long career in marine conservation. I've paid my dues. My guilt is assuaged. But as I said, we learned through this process. You learn a lot of self-reliance. You learn to take care of yourself. And I had a chance. I get back to the marine conservation message there. It was an area still where people were trying to look at the big picture. There weren't many people looking too deeply and very fine detail at things. They were still people still had more of a natural history approach, and it was during the 70s that began to change a little bit. And certainly the need for marine conservation became recognized. And it really, and we started to see marine conservation take off. Community efforts were beginning to be recognized too, which is a big change. They're still poorly recognized, but they were beginning to get recognized. And you saw more and more about involving communities. It was more about talking to communities rather than truly engaging communities, and less about empowering communities than we see these days. Because, let's tell them what we're doing. And that's a one-way flow of information. And again, I'm generalizing across the world, so there are many places where things are happening differently. But as I said, we learned through our upbringing a certain amount of self-reliance. There were rules beginning to come along. There were not too many of them. We still dived alone, especially if you worked in international marine conservation field. I mean, it was still so novel that they wondered why I even needed to get paid money to do this work. And certainly there was hardly enough money for one person. And just as one example, in the 70s, I studied the coastlines of Sri Lanka, India, and Pakistan, and the outer islands of the Seychelles. And my budget for 1 year, which included my international travel, my local travel, and my salary, was $10,000. But it wasn't money. I mean, those days we did it for adventure. Money was irrelevant. If we had a chance to go and do something that was a new challenge and fun and adventurous, we did it. We're still diving alone mostly, or I was, especially in the international conservation field. And as I said, it's still very adventurous. Here's one example of it. I was shipwrecked in Antarctica, and actually, it says the passengers and most of the crew were put ashore and so on, but that's not actually true. I went ashore with one other guy who was a veteran of the British Antarctic Survey, because he recognized where we were by the glacier, and he said X years ago he had been commissioned to build a research station there, and then Y years ago he decommissioned it, and he said, us Brits, when we do it, we seal it up and we leave food and fuel and blankets in case of emergency, and this would certainly qualify as one of those. So we went to shore, and we were only two to go to shore and to find this place. We came back 4 hours later, and it was great. I mean, it fit us all. It was dry. It was clean. There was all kinds of stuff in it. But this is a ship that's designed for ice work, so it has a reinforced outer hull and 90 centimeters inside it, an inner hull. Well, both hulls had been holed, so my cabin was flooded. I mean, I was down low in the ship, down the hierarchy. My cabin had been flooded then, but I was told immediately when I got there the ship was listed and hard on the rock. The rescue ship had come and said, get everybody out to the rescue ship. So all of this happened at 3 o'clock in the morning. I didn't get out of my Zodiac until midnight that night. No food, no fuel, anything, just a lot of diesel fuel and salt water inside my polar jumpsuit. And they gave me 3 sandwiches, 3 beers, and 3 hours to deal with it and before the next set of activities had to happen. And as a result of that, I was given a free trip to Antarctica, which I'm going to circle back to later of that role. And I think, you know, again, I look back I look back at my time in the field, those early days in Mozambique, as setting up. But and also the time that I spent in Antarctica, and I should say too, that I wanted to see what was underwater, but I didn't have anything but a tropical wetsuit. And I tried it, and it just shocked me. The shock of that cold water going to my wetsuit was terrible. So I used to put my wetsuit on in the shower. I'd have a beer, once in all my beer. Then I'd put my wetsuit on and fill it up with hot water. Then I'd have a shot of rum or scotch, whatever. And I'd go for a 20-minute dive. and I learned a lot about ice work and so on. So when I went to Johns Hopkins University for my PhD, I was invited to go along in this expedition to study walrus. And because I'd already been in icy water, I was the guy that they said should get in the water, swim through the leads in the ice. So I've just emerged. You see what's looking at me over here? I've just emerged from the ice, and then I sneak up behind these walrus. And walrus don't digest their food very well. So on your belly, sneaking up to these things is not altogether the most pleasant thing to do. But they would lie there, literally asleep, and every now and then one would rise up and look around, make a lot of noise. And this one has caught me just as I was raising the tagging device to apply the tag, and I had to hold very still and hope for the best, and then put it on. And so that was research in the early days. But you know, everything's going better for us. We're getting better equipment. We're getting more concerned about safety. Having said that, 2 years ago, my advisor, when I saw him from this time, pulled me aside. He kept saying, "Ron, I want to have a private talk with you." We were a group of people going on a dive trip in Indonesia, and he said, "I really want to talk to you." And then when we had a moment of privacy, he pulled me over and he said, "I have to apologize for you." And I said, "To you?" And I said, "Why?" He said, "For the danger I put you in." I said, I'm really sorry you feel that way. I had so much fun and such a good time that I wouldn't like to do it any other way. So now, we started off with this idea. I'm going to go back to the MPAs and conservation. We started off with very few conservation areas. They were coming in different parts of the world. We had very small conservation areas at first. They were all about no-take, keep people out, and then they started to get bigger and bigger, and they started to enable, be used combined with tourism. So you had no-take, basically, but with tourism activity in them. And that's the first time we started to see MPAs having multiple objectives. Instead of strict protection, keep people out, allow tourists in. And that was the foot in the door for the MPAs. And the research, this was really interesting to me, because I found that when I started this work, there were no field guides, honestly. And there were all these old reports by people like David Stoddard and so on that were looking, when they went to an area, that came out in Atoll Research Bulletin. They talk about the island and the vegetation and the birds and the beach rock and that sort of geology, and then go underwater. And that's how I learned about it. I had to go to those reports and say, well, this island's supposed to have this plant, so this must be this plant. And I would make little sketches. I've got tons of notebooks, and I've got little sketches in them, and to help me identify these things. And maybe there were field guides around, but I didn't have any. I mean, there were books on fishes that were this big and this thick and heavy, and not something you'd lug into the field with you. So it was a different way of working, and the research focus was beginning to narrow. So, and then in the 80s, marine conservation really took off. There were certainly larger MPAs. The idea of multiple use became entrenched. So you had core areas, as they used to call them, and some places still do, which would be no-take, and then larger buffer areas around them of multiple use. And community conservation really came into its own during this period. I happened to be in the Sultanate of Oman, and one has to extemporize and use whatever kind of transport you can in the desert. And that was very exciting. Again, I have this whole country with an unstudied coastline, and they say, go and study it on your own. And but that's, it might horrify you, but that's really what I like to do. And yeah, we're still pretty much underfunded in the marine conservation field. I told you the $10,000 story. The equipment's getting better. Field work and diving at that time, sometimes you're alone. I tended to be alone because I was in the international conservation field, and it was taking a long time to catch up. So I did a lot of my field work entirely alone, and carrying my Zodiac on top of my vehicle and my compressor and my tanks and everything, and that's how we worked then. And it wasn't a bad thing, because at night the lights go out when the sun goes down, so you got a lot of time to think about what you see. And I think that thinking is really critical, because we go down. It's different now. And this is not by any means a criticism of the way you guys work, or I and others work, but the field is crowded, and people are becoming more and more specialized. So instead of going out and trying to put the whole picture together and be a geologist and a botanist and a ichthyologist and a scleractiniologist, if that's what they call our coral person, and all of those things together, and a conservationist, we're becoming more and more specialized. And actually, it's becoming a good thing, because teamwork is happening more, and that there's safety in teamwork too. And yeah, so I mentioned the Sultanate of Oman. I thought I should just tell you where it is. This is the Strait of Hormuz. This is Iran. This is the Masundam Peninsula here of Oman, and this is where I was working. This is one of the places I was working, but I just thought I'd share a story of how I had to work here. There was a naval station up there, a small naval base. So I would go to a place with my Zodiac, and my compressor, and my water, and my food, and my fuel. And then 5 days later, they come pick me up, take me to another beach, perhaps a place like that, drop me off. 5 days later, and replenish my water supply and fuel supply. 5 days later, they pick me up, take me and drop me off again. And in this area, it was really interesting, because my only company were smugglers. Flying between Dubai in the Emirates over that way, and Iran up there. And they would, after women's nylons, so I learned. I could learn a bit of Arabic, I did. And so, and that was the big business. Coca-Cola, and women's nylons is what they were carrying. It was terrifying at night when, it's getting dark and you hear this deep guttural growl of these cigar birds that were anathema of I think, the US Navy up there some years before, and I would just disappear, or if they came to anchor off my beach, I had a military camouflage hat with a 10-pop, and I'd stand there and make it look like a rifle, and like I was some official. They'd look at me, and then they'd take off. That's the way we work. And then we had a Khamsin wind, so the very strong winds that come out of the north, and it caught me on a beach, and this is a drowned mountain range. It's very rocky, very hot. What am I doing now? And so every beach is the confluence of a lot of flow areas for water that fall on these mountains. And the rain came down, and for 4 of those 5 days, there was really heavy rain, a lot of wind, and I couldn't do anything. mean, honestly. And I had an assistant then, and he lived in his wetsuit that whole time. I had a wool blanket, which is amazing in the rain. And I found some rope, a big piece of rope, and I made a little coil and a bit of overhang. But we walked up and down these mountains just to keep warm in the daytime. We found old villages with big Alibaba clay pots half buried in clay and stuff. Amazing stuff that we found. And then a boat came in with in this part of the world that people had a summer, one season home and another season home in different areas. And a boat came in full of a big fiberglass boat with goats and some women on it. And a rough sea, and the guys there were, they couldn't land, they didn't know what to do. They saw us and they shouted out to us and they asked for help. So I swam out and they said, "Can you take our women ashore and our goats?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, sure." The goats came first. They just threw goats in the shore. And then we go out again, and then we took the woman ashore. And I have today, over the door at home, outside, a sawfish bill. And one old man there came to see that we were okay, because we'd done this, and now they knew we were there. And so when everyone went to the village, they told them about this swimming ashore and stuff. And so he came and to see how we were, and asked if we had food, and we said yes. And he saw me cleaning a dive knife that I'd found that must have belonged to somebody in the Navy who'd been diving. It was a big, fancy one, and I was just cleaning all the incrustation off it. And I could see that he really appreciated it. And so then one day he said, he invited me to walk down the coast a bit, and there was a big old freezer that had floated up on the beach, and it was his store for his fishing gear. And we were talking, and he had this big bill. And I said, "My goodness, where did that come from?" And it came from this bay. This bay. And he and he said, "What are you going to do?" He said, "I'm going to put it above the door of my house." So on the last day, when the Navy ship came to pick us up, move us, he came over and we were talking again, and he called me back down, and I gave him the knife, and I gave him some cans of food, the beans that they had there, and he was very happy. And then he gave me the bill, and I said, "No, I can't take it. I really can't. It's yours." And he said, "No, I want you to put it above the door in your house." Is that Zach at the back? You see it? Yeah. And he said, "I want you to put it above your door because you'll always remember this place, and you'll always remember us." And that's where it's been. So anyway, I really got off course here. So this is where I was first exposed to bleaching. And it was in this area here. And, I found amazing coral. And I thought I'd died and gone to heaven as a conservationist, because there were great coral and no people using them, depend on it. So you could get conservation in place, my job was to make coastal zone management plans for the whole coast of Oman and embed in them marine protected conservation areas. And so here I had beautiful coral reefs, no people to worry about, no social problems to sort out. Could be a quick thing to do. Then the water got hotter and hotter and hotter, and literally the corals cooked and died. And there was 95% mortality of the corals, down to 3 or 4 meters. And then it got me thinking, it's in 1990, what can managers do to manage coral reefs in the face of these kind of threats that are way beyond the boundaries of our protected areas, or our ability to really do anything? And I struggled with that. I began to see patterns, and when I didn't put two and two together, I was working for IUCN, developing a Western Indian Ocean East Africa marine program for them in 1998, when the bleaching happened there. It was very bad. And again, I saw patterns, and areas that bleached and areas that didn't. And then in 1999, I joined TNC, and I went around and about places we were working then. And again, I saw patterns. I came to Palau, And that is where everything actually felt together for me. So, what we were seeing, of course, is this extensive bleaching, these coral graveyards that came out in 1998. And what was really interesting to me is that people were really focused on the death and dying and monitoring the death and dying process. And no one was, really understanding well that bleaching is patchy. It doesn't happen equally everywhere. And I said to my TNC colleagues, if we can understand why areas don't bleach, then we potentially have the key to manage them to survive into the future. Because those factors that keep those reefs from bleaching might be the areas that will provide the natural refuges where they'll survive the bleaching events. And of course, I found it in Palau, and there were natural refuges. So I came here in 1999. So that's a picture from Site 29 in Nico Bay, and I think many of you have been there. It's amazing today to me, still, as it was then, especially now that we know it's growing in water that's as acid as predicted to happen in 2100, and the coral reefs are thriving. I also did see reefs that had recovered incredibly. So this is a small patch reef way up north, not along the state, and this is what it looked like after 5 years and after 10 years. So that idea that there are areas that can resist stress and areas that can recover quickly from it was what we used to build our resilience principles for application in marine conservation way back in 1999 and beyond. And now I'm just going to give a little plug for Palau, because when we were in Palau in 1999, when these thoughts began to crystallize and fall into place, and the Palauans latched onto it straight away. We all have ideas, and we all have what we think are great ideas, but if somebody doesn't grab your idea, it just goes away over time. But in Palau, they grabbed it, and they thought, this is a really good idea, and it's going to be the foundation for a nationwide protected area network that's resilient to climate change. And because of that commitment in Palau, it gave traction to these ideas of resilience in coral reefs. There are a few other things too. I mean, Billy Causey, who was then the superintendent of the Florida Keys Marine Monument, he had recognized that some of these factors that we were talking about were playing out there too, so he was an early champion of that. That helped. But since then, we have put our resilience principles up onto a website, the reefresilience.org is where you find it down here, www.reefresilience.org. And we have provided training to trainers, managers, in 75% of the countries in the world where coral reefs occur. And so that started from Palau. Palau was the catalyst for all of this. Well, I would say just because of the fact that they were so keen on the idea and its implementation. And we saw various things. So climate change has come out. The resilience became more of a rallying cry through this period of the early 2000s and on. We started thinking more about networks rather than MPAs, and networks of MPAs that were mutually replenishing. So there was connectivity coming into all of this. Community areas were very much in now. All these national inventories of protected areas, community areas were very much considered for legitimate conservation. Sorry, Anna, running out of time?
No, you're good.
Okay. And people began to think, well, are we investing in the right places? Are we investing in something that is a winner, or should we throw it out and it's a loser really? Should we throw it out and invest somewhere else? And that's really hard to do. As all of you who work in conservation know, once you go through that process of consultation and legislation and so on to get an area established legally, to go and undo it and say that really isn't that good, is even more challenging. But it is happening in places. Yeah, I've talked about Palau being the first adopter of it, and then Palau, got accolades for this as well. I mean, it was recognized for its Protected Area Network Act and its Shark Haven. So Palau not only was the catalyst, but it was also recognized more globally, and then it led to some regional initiatives that included marine protected area networks, resilience to climate change, spearheaded by Palau for the Micronesia Challenge, which then led to the Coral Triangle Initiative, when President Rumengesau spoke to SPY, SPRY, the acronym for the Indonesian president at the time, who I should know, and got them interested. And Indonesia became the champion for a Coral Triangle program, and now it's gone to the Caribbean Challenge, which is moving ahead. And from there, the newest one is the Western Indian Ocean Challenge. So there's amazing impact on the way conservation is done that comes from this partnership of scientists working with practitioners at different levels, policy makers, in a soft sort of way. It's not, here's your science, this is what you must do. It's working out how to make it work, and the responsiveness that comes, and reacting to the responsiveness that comes out of the countries where we work. And actually, this is a really important thing for science sometimes, because the managers tell us, when I ask them, how much confidence do you need in the data to make a decision? And they say, we need a better than 50% chance. So if we can give you 60%, they respond, we're golden. So that's from a manager's perspective, who has to make decisions quickly. They want better science, but they're happy with what they can get as long as there's a certain amount of reliability in it. And so there's sometimes the danger that we can over-design the science. I'm going more into the science now because I'm seeing who's in front of me. And so bear that in mind, we need good science, always, and no science is too much science. But do we really need sea level rise monitoring to tell us that we're fishing from the balcony of our house and there's a saltwater crocodile underneath it? I don't think so. It's the regional approaches that come up. But the other thing is that I think we need to really appreciate is where we're sitting right now, and the huge role that the Palau International Coral Reef Center has played in enabling people to come and do relevant research here and really take our understanding of resilience forward. And a number of groups have come in, and I just think you're all, so lucky to be here, to do the work you do here, and have the teachers you have who have brought you here and enabled this for you. I mean, what an opportunity. And it's really terrific. So now we go around to some lessons learned. So I told you I was going back to Antarctica. So it took me a few years to take up on this free trip. But I am a total Shackleton group. There's no question about it. And you just have to read that. That's going to be once I drop my TNC email. This is going to be just above in my signature for my new email. And I do think that it's the exploration of different kinds and the adventure that has drawn me into the field and actually made me better able to do the work I'm doing, because I'm used to being uncomfortable in the field, and I'm used to making do with what you got, and it gives you a certain confidence when you're on your own and the sea's rough and you've got to get in there. It's not smart, I know, but you grow up, and some of it is just about confidence. If you've got confidence that you can live on an island far away, that you can climb the coconut palm to put an aerial up for an antenna for a radio if you need to do that, that you don't have to worry about your menus, you'll just make do, then the opportunities that are out there are amazing. So this is what I've learned, and I think no one will disagree with me, that knowledge really is empowering. So all the knowledge we get is empowering, and the stuff that you are doing through your research and will do through your research as your lives go on is invaluable. But the other thing I'd say, you need to seize opportunities. Really, if an opportunity comes up, especially when you're young, take it and do it, because you'll learn so much. And travel, and get exposure. And I'll give you an example of exposure. If you go out here, I'm sure you've all seen it, where you've got Parietes cylindrica and these sort of corals that grow loosely together. They grow out, and they get too heavy as they grow out, and they break off. And so you have these big chunks of coral that are breaking off, and they're rolling down the front of the reef. They cause destruction behind them. If you saw that in Indonesia, you'd say dynamite fishing. Because they do dynamite fishing there. And if you didn't have broad exposure, and you hadn't seen this in different areas where dynamite fishing doesn't happen, or where there aren't even people, and you see the same thing, the same sort of breakage and so on, then you would misidentify it. And so it's really important not to leap to conclusions. Go out there, see what's out there, travel around, have a good time, and listen to local people. We've been very lucky to have Gary. I don't know if he's here, but I really hope he is this evening as a guide. And he knows so much. And he will take you to secret places. And so you can learn. And you can, by listening, you can learn more than by talking. And I've been talking solidly for a long time. And also, be observant always. I think that really is an important message. What's going well in the marine conservation field? Well, I think those large multi-objective marine protected areas really are a good thing. We can get effective management over much bigger areas. The integrated management approaches to the ridges to reefs are really important, and that's going well. Community engagement, as opposed to just talking to communities, really engaging and empowering them, is really going well, and we're getting so much more conservation happening. The management, the partnerships that we have, that we're working with so many different people, so many different agencies, so many different organizations. That sort of partnership approach and the teamwork that results from it is really good. I also think the teamwork that's resulting from the fact that we're becoming more specialized is good too, because you get many great minds thinking about little bits and pieces, but working in teams to put them all together. And that's wonderful to see. And I think the whole idea of resilience, I'm an advocate of resilience, of course, I'm biased, but I think that the way the science that's gone into it, and the number of people who think about understanding it better, but applying it better is really good. And the fact that people are now looking not just at coral reef resilience, the whole ecosystem resilience and social resilience. And so how these things all fit together. And emerging from that is now this new concept of resilience-based management. And climate change adaptation is going well too. What do people have to do differently on islands or in their local economies to make it through climate change? And then this is what I'd say I've learned. You have to embrace change. Things have changed since the beginning of time, and so it's really important with some of the monitoring work we do. We get a baseline. We want to manage to maintain that baseline, or we did. I think things have changed. But the baseline is good to measure change. What is really harder, I think, to measure is what's good change versus bad change. So we need to recognize change, but we need to say, this is change that's going in a direction that's good and inevitable, and it's okay. And here's a change that's going in the wrong direction. What can we do to shift it over? I would also, definitely we have to think out of the box these days. There's too much going on. And I've learned that. I've also learned to be bold and don't fear failure. After all, FAIL, you know what FAIL stands for? The acronym FAIL? First attempt in learning. And so go out there and make your first attempts in learning. Yeah, and make the science relevant. I already talked about this. Talk to, and the way of doing that is actually talk to the managers. You know, find out. Don't anticipate what science a manager needs to answer a question. Ask them what they get the questions from them, and design research to provide the answers for what they need to do their job properly. There isn't enough. There's some of that going on, but it really isn't enough. And then I said, and then modeling. I already talked about the croc under the house, and it's a real thing. I think modeling is good. It needs to be used wisely. And I have worked with models, including here in Palau. And the model that was the bleaching risk model that was developed from here went too far, because it was all about building a better mousetrap than it was about building a model that told the story. And it disconnected the biology from the physics. Steve and I have already had a talk about this a little bit. So that, so think about it. And the example here, 1999, I slept on the beach on an island in the Salm Islands. When I went there last year, I was in a house that was this high off the water, off the ground, and our Melanesia program director tells me that when he goes there with his son at high tide, they fish from the bulkhead. And certainly, I caught saltwater crocodile that was catchable under the house and carried it, and we released it into the mangrove. So that to me is more than enough evidence that sea level is rising. And there are people doing sea level rise modeling in that area. And anyway, that's always a good creed to live by. And then I just have to say that Palau has been an amazing place for me in my life, and there have been several tipping points. The welcome here has always been warm, the friendship's wonderful, but the freedom to explore has been terrific, and so many countries are closed and becoming more closed to this kind of exploration that is still possible here in Palau. And you can see the benefit, because you see science being done that feeds back into Palau and then is used and applied. So there's a benefit both ways. And the freedom to explore and discover here is fantastic. I think we have to have some of these stories afterwards. But the inspiration I got here, the great diving, was really important to me. And I'm thank you all for that. It's really fantastic. I also learned a lot here. I learned about policy applications and linking policy and practice, and the power, the real power of community partnerships. But I have to be honest that coming here and coming up with sort of developing these principles of resilience was a tipping point in my life and my career. And that is what I am most grateful to Palau for, because it really made a difference in my life and the things I did. So I want to thank you all for that. And the leadership that the country has played through some of the things I mentioned earlier on. It's just terrific. Thank you. I'm happy to have any questions now. I'm also happy to spill over and have questions. My throat's a bit. Any questions?
I'm wondering how you got into conservation. So you went to graduate school. Like, what was that decision like?
I grew up with I started spearfishing at a young age. It's what people did. I collected shells. I had a shell collection. I had a bird's egg collection. I had a crab collection. And I mounted all of these things. I went fishing with my dad a lot. And he fished a lot and very successfully. And I definitely grew up in a spearfishing collecting culture. And Mozambique, I could go and chase South African tourist girls, or I could go out and there wasn't much else to do. There wasn't television or anything. So and then I got a job. In those days you could do it. But I got a job as a scuba instructor on a natural history tour ship, and I wasn't even a qualified scuba diver. and so when I went out there, and I was cheek by jowl with Sir Peter Scott, the son of Robert Falcon Scott of the Antarctic era, who was a consummate conservationist, and Keith Shackleton, a relative of Sir Ernest Shackleton, also conservationist, and from the US, Roger Tory Peterson, and all the Peterson field guides and things, if they're still around. So those are the people that I was up close with and working with. Jacques Cousteau, even at some point, and so I got. I mean, and then that was important. But I went to reefs in the Indian Ocean where no one had ever dived before. I mean, very remote areas. There was no way to get there. And I was seeing reefs for the first time. I was seeing quantities of fish that were unafraid. I was seeing everything that we had collected before in abundance. And that really made an impression on me. So I had my spear gun with me. And I put it away, it had a case, and I decided I was going to get a sea burial. So when I was on my way to Antarctica, crossing the Drake Passage, I took a bottle of rum and my spear gun, and I went on this heaving deck, and I had a chat, a few swigs and a chat with my spear gun.
He's going to stick around. We're going to be selling some beers for a little bit longer. But I also want to let you guys all know that next Thursday we're going to have another lecture. So back to back, it's going to be on the Nautilus. So be there. Thank you guys.
Yeah,